Welcome to 10th or Tuesday. This is episode number 35. My name is Michael Boldin. I'm joined here by
Michael Maharrey.
So today, Mike, is day 488 that the GOP in Washington, D.C. has failed to get rid of Obamacare. We can also add to that the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 68, its amendments in 86. What else have they not gotten rid of? The EPA. They have not gotten rid of Common Core.
The Department of Education.
The Department of Education is still there. Let's see what else.
Plaza's in place. They actually renewed that.
More surveillance. Man, they haven't
$21 trillion of debt and what, 100 and I think the last figure I read, we're looking at like 1.1 or 1.2 trillion dollar deficits a year heading down the road with rising interest rates.
How much worse is it than it was under Obama?
You know, I need to look at that.
Okay.
We've got one of our bloggers that's actually is working on a report about how spending has gone up pretty consistently no matter who's in the White House. So
it's insane. It's insane. So the whole run-up to the election, Trump versus Clinton, we kept getting told by people, oh, you don't need to worry about issue X, Common Core, Obamacare, whatever it may be, spying, all this stuff was going to be gone. Just have to elect the Republicans in Washington, D.C. Specifically, it was President Trump. But in general, we've heard this for years. We heard that, elect the Tea Party people, they'll get rid of Obamacare. Vote against Obama, you'll get rid of Obamacare. So it's not happening. And in fact, whatever the leading party is in Washington, D.C., that same party does a bad job on a state level, too. So a couple of weeks ago, we actually now the GOP actually sounds like conservatives. They lean towards the Constitution when Democrats are in power.
Right.
So that we support them when they do that. But these days they've been really atrocious on a lot of stuff. When you're talking about $21 trillion in debt, that is insane to actually to do that and just claim, well, we had to. So on the state level, we reported on a very good bill from Senator Nathan Dahm, the Constitutional Carry Act for Oklahoma that passed both houses by pretty good margins. SB 1212 went to Governor Mary Fallin, Republican, a self-proclaimed right to keep and bear arms. She calls herself a Second Amendment rights supporter, which is a terrible phrase. Well, she vetoed it.
She sure did. She did indeed. And it's always telling when the first thing that they feel obligated to say is, I support the Second Amendment, but, the last time I looked at the text, there is no but in the Second Amendment. And but she vetoed it and said that she thinks that the current laws on the books are adequate and that people, it's absolutely necessary that people go get permission from the state in order to carry a firearm concealed. Although I think in Oklahoma, I believe it's an open carry state, so they can carry openly without a license. I don't really understand what the difference.
I think they were allowing concealed. I'm not sure, but she is a gun rights supporter and decided to veto a bill. The NRA was supportive of this bill. We certainly are behind it, and it was killed. And we tweeted at Senator Dahm, and he said there is zero chance of an override because of the way the process works in the two-year session in Oklahoma, meaning this was transmitted at the end of the legislative session. Sin die is what they called when they adjourn. And so when the governor vetoes, she's out of office. This is her legacy now, vetoing a gun rights bill on the way out. So unfortunately, the Republican establishment types failed on a state level as well. Also in New Hampshire, where they passed a pretty strict restriction on the state use of asset forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture there. We all know, and we've talked about this pretty often, the problem when you only restrict it on a state level and then don't address the federal equitable sharing program, opting out of that program as well. What the state and local law enforcement do is they ignore the state restrictions on asset forfeiture and they consider most any case where they want to use this process a federal one. They just call up a federal partner. They call them their federal partners. And they say, can we make a federal case out of this and then go under federal asset forfeiture? Well, a bill that would have helped address this issue, a stepping stone, SB 498 in New Hampshire, would have required reporting on this so you could inform the public. How often is this happening? Is this really an issue? How many people are being affected by these programs? Tell us a little bit about what happened over there in New Hampshire, Mike.
Yeah, so the bill that was introduced was a really strong reporting bill. And like you said, that reporting aspect is a very important first step because it shines a light on what's going on. It's that sunlight is the best disinfectant. It makes the roaches scramble out from under the rock. And so this was a really good reporting bill. It had a lot of very specific criteria that the Attorney General would have to gather from state and local law enforcement. And among those things that had to be reported was if something was passed on to the federal government and the circumstances and how much money was collected. So it would have really shined a light on how this adoption equitable sharing process is working in the state of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, the bill was amended in committee and it stripped out all of the specifics. So they have to report something about asset forfeiture, basically. And the way it's written, it only applies to state asset forfeiture. So the federal reporting is out completely. And I actually shot an email to the sponsor and he confirmed that basically they made the bill, pretty much useless in his terms. Now, the good news is he indicated that he's committed to building on that next year, so he's not going to quit. But it was disappointing to see that coming from the...
it's a Republican majority there in New Hampshire as well on both the Senate and the House side, the House by a much larger margin, and they were willing to pull out these provisions that would have just required them to tell us how often they're doing an end run around the already strict state laws on asset forfeiture, partnering with the Department of Justice and getting 80% of the proceeds from Washington, D.C. Just would have just told people. Then they could have made the case that this was okay. So maybe if they have nothing to hide, they should have nothing to fear. So,
right.
They're clearly hiding. They're clearly hiding what's going on with the asset forfeiture program in New Hampshire and elsewhere. Unfortunately, the Republican leadership in New Hampshire did not want to shine a light on that. We're not going to be...
I guarantee you it's happening a lot. I just finished up a report that will be published soon on Missouri's asset forfeiture and how much money they're collecting in equitable sharing. Missouri happens to have very strong asset forfeiture laws at the state level, requires a conviction. All money that's collected is supposed to go into the school fund. And the ACLU just released a report, and I don't remember the specific numbers, but just roughly the state and local law enforcement collected over $6 million. That's $6 million in asset forfeiture money. And
was that through equitable sharing?
Well, no, that was the total that was seized.
Okay.
That was the total. Of that, only 300,000 plus or minus actually went into the school fund as is stipulated by law. So all of that other money
is going to department budgets?
Going to police department budgets in defiance of Missouri law through equitable sharing. So they're doing almost all of their asset forfeiture in Missouri now through the equitable sharing program. The vast amount of money is going through that system. And so it'll be really interesting. People will definitely want to read that report. If you want to, we've been saying this for a long time that they use this to circumvent, and this shows just how much it really happens.
So although there's been a positive first step in New Hampshire a couple of years ago in the previous session to restrict asset forfeiture on a state level, unfortunately, they decided to hide what might be happening on the federal level. At least we have the information in Missouri, so then we can go back and say, like, look, this is pretty crazy here. It's time to lock this down. We don't want to be all negative today, right?
Nope. We got some positives.
In Minnesota, I was surprised to see this, but they amended a bill to remove sales taxes, amended onto some crazy appropriations around,
huge.
Just some kind of nasty state level spending bill.
30 pages.
Yeah, stuff that they shouldn't be doing, stuff that violates people's rights, that tax property rights, all kinds of stuff. I didn't read the whole thing. I just happened to see this section while I was using legiscan.com, where I do a lot of legislative searches on a day-to-day basis, that there was a bill to remove sales taxes from the exchange of gold coins for fiat dollars. Mike, give us the overview of that for people who may not have heard what's going on.
So this was actually originally a standalone bill, and it ended up getting the language amended into this giant omnibus bill. It took me like 20 minutes to actually find it in this huge pile of steaming poo. But this is a positive part of this. So I don't know if we support the bill itself, but we definitely support this provision. And in Minnesota, they had already eliminated sales taxes on the sale of gold bars. But it was a weirdly written law that still taxed gold and silver bullion coins. So like your American Eagles, your Canadian Maple Leafs.
And those are the only ones that are under probably federal tender laws that are authorized for use in commerce.
Yeah, that's correct. It's that 99.99% bullion is kind of the standard that it goes. So
I was thinking the American Eagle coin, the U.S. minted tender is probably what the federal government would claim is the only thing you could use, and of course, they kept the taxes on that.
Yeah, but now they took them off, so that's good.
Well, if it gets signed.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So
I guess we have to say that with the caveat. I don't know if it's good if that bill gets signed
because there could be a lot of really bad stuff in there. Let's just assume that it's total garbage. They're going to pass some kind of nasty spending bill in Minnesota, like they do in every state. So if we can get this win on the board, something that removes a roadblock to using gold and silver as money as it should be, then that's a very positive thing. So House File HF 4385 is the awful spending bill in Minnesota with a very positive economic potential there with gold and silver being able to use as money in transactions. Something else that's been interesting on a local level is dealing with surveillance. So although the NSA is a real problem, we also know that this is only a small piece of the federal and international surveillance state.
Right.
We know that local governments do a lot of kind of granular on-the-ground spying through stingray devices, intercepting phones' connections to cell towers. They use license plate readers to track location of where people are. They use drones, all kinds of different technologies, a lot of times that are funded by the federal government, grants handed directly to local law enforcement saying, hey, buy the stuff, or here's the equipment, now spy on people, and then, or use it however you see fit, but share with us the data. Mm-hmm. So local governments are doing a lot of kind of on-the-ground surveillance in a mass way, at least geographically small, but they're catching everything on a local level and then sending it to Washington, D.C. for crazy databases that they're building on people. Facial recognition and metadata, just information on your choices in life.
Right.
And this surveillance ordinance to restrict that or to address that in Oakland just it went through a bunch of phases and it just got passed into law and is now in effect, right?
That is correct, and it's we've reported on these type of bills before, and it's very similar to a bill that's pending at the state level there in California that would require this in every city. But basically what it does is it requires local law enforcement to create a surveillance plan for any type of technology they want to use or purchase or borrow, and then that has to be approved at a public meeting by the local city government. So it doesn't necessarily restrict anything, but it creates a process that individuals can protest. It can be stopped through council action, and creates transparency and oversight. So it's a great first step. It creates a doorway that we can use to limit the proliferation of this type of surveillance gear. And this Oakland ordinance, from what activists have said out there in California, it's the strongest one passed in the entire nation. It actually includes some provisions that others haven't that protect whistleblowers and prohibit any type of non-disclosure agreement. So we know for a fact that a lot of times the federal government, the FBI, or the DEA requires a non-disclosure agreement when a local police department gets something like a stingray.
Right.
And that's absolutely against the law under this new ordinance in Oakland, California. So they actually took a
so there is some restriction. There is some restriction on what they're...
Yeah. So like I said, this is the strongest in the nation. And it builds on a model that we helped develop with the ACLU for local surveillance. And they've kind of taken it to the next level. So hopefully we'll see that proliferate, I like that word today, in other areas of the country, because this is something that every city needs to pass, something I'm fighting for here in Lexington. And
I like the way you actually describe it. It's not necessarily a restriction outright, but it's a mechanism. So right now, what's happening is local law enforcement is acting as an arm of the federal government.
Exactly.
If the Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security reaches out to or makes available to local law enforcement grants or equipment, and they aggressively market this stuff, say, hey, you want some stuff. Now, here's the agreement. Once you do it, share the information. Don't tell people your process for using it. etc. So right now it's a kind of a direct tunnel, an express lane between the federal government and these local law enforcement agencies. And this process, this ordinance passed in Oakland and a number of other cities around the country. I think Northampton, Massachusetts has one that's similar, for example.
Berkeley, Davis.
There's another one pending in St. Louis that we're going to be reporting on as well. What it does is it interposes the local governing body in between into the process. And at least you have a chance at that point. Now, a lot of local governing bodies, I live in Los Angeles, are pretty awful. Right?
We have one in Lexington, too, that's pretty awful.
They're pretty awful, too, just in different ways. So I think I have a much better chance of calling a city council member. I'm not even sure who it is. I should actually lead by example on that, but I'm going to do much better than calling.
I know mine.
I'm going to do better than calling Dianne Feinstein.
My council member's been dodging me now for about 3 months.
Dodging?
I even made a meme and put him on a milk carton.
You're going to do another Michael Moore film. What's the guy's first name?
His name is Preston.
So Preston and Me is your documentary. You're just going to follow him around at the grocery store, asking him questions. You just want to understand.
Do a little surveillance, So
right.
you see something, say something, right?
So taking action on this on a local level is very important. I think this same kind of process could and should be applied on other issues, whether it's the right to keep and bear arms, education, healthcare, whatever it may be. Stop just willy-nilly, automatic, knee-jerk response, whatever the federal government wants you to do, just participate in it. And that's what's happening with these local governments, law enforcement agencies primarily, whether it's civil asset forfeiture, surveillance, or gun control. They just keep participating. They keep doing it. And they're the front line of what's helping Washington, D.C. get away with this stuff. So it's important to kind of just step back, shine some light on it, and then maybe ramp it up from there.
I'm all for ramping it up.
Aren't we always?
Ramp.
Another bill that passed just in the last few days or so was in Rhode Island, Mike, the Right to Try Act. Let me see what the bill number is on that guy. It's 7240? No, 7294. House Bill 7294, the Right to Try Act. Give us an overview of what's going on there.
So your Right to Try Act is, we've called it a narrow avenue of nullification. And it effectively allows people who have terminal illnesses to bypass the FDA approval process and access experimental drugs that have passed phase 1 but have not been completely approved. It allows them to access these despite the federal government's insistence that they go through this horribly intrusive and packed with red tape process to get permission. So it eliminates the FDA out of the system, allows a person at the state level to access this treatment. We've seen it work in Texas. Great cancer doctor out there was able to continue treating over 70 people under the state right to try law when the feds pulled the plug on his research project.
Yeah, that's Ibrahim Deplasant. 70.
I'm glad you said that because I can't ever say his name.
I just said it. I did an interview with a friend, Lowell Nelson, in Salt Lake area. He was subbing for a radio show in Salt Lake today, and I was talking about Ibrahim Deplasant. These right to try laws. There's how many states now? 38, 40?
Rhode Island is either 40 or 41.
Well, they haven't fully passed it. It has to go to the Senate, so it's
okay. So they passed it. Okay, so it is 40. They would be the 41st.
Okay, so 40 states are basically saying, FDA, we're at least in a very narrow scope, we're going to ignore your restrictions on people who are dying to make a choice to try something that might heal them and might kill them. It's their choice. Well, Ibrahim Deplasant down in Texas was treating people for the type of cancer that took the life of Steve Jobs under a trial that was authorized by the FDA. At the end of the 5 years, he was getting positive results. The FDA said, sorry, pal, you can't continue. They rejected his application to continue. And luckily, that same year, Texas passed the Right to Try Act, so we just started continuing under the Right to Try law, and those people, at least at the last check, were still alive when all of them were given 6 months or less to live.
Yep.
So FDA regulations can often kill people or just ignore them until they die, and we don't want to do that. Well, we believe that people should have their own choice on this
Absolutely.
matter. So House Bill 7294 is moved out of the state house there in Rhode Island. It has to go through the Senate. I think their session probably winds down pretty soon, so I'm not sure if that's going to get to the finish line. But we see very positive things happening across the country on that specific issue. Why not just apply that thing to everything?
Right?
The Right to Defend Act.
I like it.
I mean, seriously. I mean, even if it's a narrow... I mean, if you look at the most successful things on the state level vis-a-vis federal power, they've all started out very narrow. The California Compassionate Use Act, the Medical Marijuana Act of Prop 215 in 1996, was considered very narrow at the time. You just had to have certain diseases and a recommendation from a doctor, and it grew, pun intended. It kept growing from there. And we see the same thing happening with right to try. Yeah. You take one very narrow thing, then people learn that the world doesn't come to an end, and then we have more freedom.
I did a talk the other day to a gun group in Memphis, Tennessee, via Skype. And it was interesting because I was talking to them about this very thing. And the example that I used in Tennessee a couple of years ago.
Oh, there was someone who wrote in this morning. Did I forward you this email?
I don't
Someone wrote in and said, I much enjoyed your presentation the other day. I think I forgot to forward. I'll send it your way.
Well, that's nice. It was a good presentation. And one of the bills that I talked about in Tennessee was a law that they passed. Well, it wasn't a law. They repealed the state law against killing this invasive vulture. And it's a federally protected bird. And the state of Tennessee said, you know what? We're not going to enforce this law anymore. As far as the state of Tennessee is concerned, you can shoot the vulture. And I'm pretty sure people are shooting the vultures, in fact, because these things actually kill cattle. But this is another example, just a very narrow, focused, targeted pushback against a federal law that doesn't work in a given state. And that's exactly what I told this gun group. I said, you can take the Vulture Bill. Everybody loved the Vulture Bill in Tennessee. You can take the Vulture Bill and apply it to firearms. And even if you start with something narrow, we've seen a couple of states loosen up the restrictions on on firearms sound suppressors,
right?
Silencers. And this is another very narrow, targeted thing that it's the old sales tactic, using the foot in the door. You get your foot in there, and these things tend to expand. Like in Texas last year, or they weren't in session this year, but during their last legislative session, there was a proposal to expand right to try and not only apply it to people who are terminally ill, but also people who have just chronic conditions.
But we've seen it expanded in Louisiana and now Utah. They passed a very narrow version. Then they added a little bit to it in each of those states, Louisiana last year and then Utah this year.
That's right. So the foot in the door technique, get your foot in. And like you said, people realize the world doesn't come to an end.
Yeah.
The horrible consequences that people say are going to happen don't happen. And then people actually benefit from having more freedom.
Yeah.
And so it's a net plus. And
that's what you've covered this from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 were passed. He enclosed a copy of I think he called it the Kentucky Resolves, and he said, we should always push for people to hear the full principles of what we should be doing.
Right.
But then strategically, we should push as far as events will render prudent. Those are Jefferson's words. So step by step at the right timing is important. It's hard to know whether you've taken too small or too big of a step until after the fact. Could you have gone further? A lot of times, people who believe in liberty always think it's never enough unless it's full liberty right off the bat. But a lot of times, the ones that push for the most, that try to get the most done, are never even given a hearing. You got to remember that the people we're talking about trying to get to do the right things are generally all the bad guys.
Right.
So the fact that we're getting even the bad guys to do things that we want them to do, I think tells us that this strategy from Thomas Jefferson is pretty damn smart.
Yep. He was a brilliant guy. And, we see it. And I think it's interesting. And I don't think people realize just how much these local actions percolate up to the state level and then eventually up to the federal level. And I've done some reporting on marijuana, and how all of a sudden you have all of these, former drug warriors at the federal level that are, Boehner, who's now on the board of a marijuana company. So they see the writing on the wall. We had the sports betting Supreme Court case that just that was just a big victory for the 10th Amendment. But that would have never happened if the state of New Jersey hadn't said, you know what, we're not going to worry about what federal law says. We're going to go ahead and repeal our sports gambling laws to begin with. So it requires this state action, local action, and then it percolates up. Very rarely do we see anything that works from the top down in politics.
So
unless it's bad crap.
Even for people who believe in going to the federal courts to protect their rights, even for those people, I totally disagree with that strategy.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I argue that it's dangerous. I know you do. We've got Dave Benner's great ebook, The 14th Amendment and the Incorporation Doctrine. It's a free download at members.10thamendmentcenter.com. The URL is primarily for members who donate to help us financially, but there are a bunch of free previews, and one of them is Benner's book. And we always make the case that it's not smart strategy because when they screw up for the whole country. Exactly. And when you go a state-by-state strategy, when they screw up, they only screw up in that area, and at least you have a chance. Now, of course, the opposite is true. When they get it right for the whole country. But I would make the case that the Supreme Court, more often than not by a large number, gets it wrong. They don't care about the founding vision for the Constitution, what the ratifiers gave us. They care about precedent. And precedent has been bad for, 150 plus years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got an email from I'm not sure if it was from a TAC member or just somebody who picked up something from my website, but she was asking the question, why did I think that Kagan voted with the majority? You know, she's considered a pretty hard left-leaning justice. Why did she vote for this state sovereignty?
Oh, Murphy versus NCAA.
Yeah, Murphy versus NCAA. It was a 7-2 decision. And, I speculated that judges revere two things, precedent and policy. And anybody that tries to tell you that judges don't care about policy, they just care about the law, they're full of crap, because judges are just as much policymakers as anybody. But they revere precedent, and that's where the anti-commandeering doctrine, that's where we're fortunate, because the precedent was set 175 years ago that the federal government cannot require states to enforce enforce federal law and implement federal programs. So that is set in precedent. I think judges are a little bit reluctant to go against it, even if they don't like it. And then there's policy. I don't know if Kagan has any connections with the betting world or not, but, it wouldn't surprise me. But whatever, this worked out in our favor, and we're certainly going to use the tool, the anti-commandeering doctrine, because, like you said, it's the one thing that they've gotten right, and it's pretty well set in precedent now, so that's good.
It's one of the few things that they've been consistently correct on over the years. It's reinforcing James Madison's advice from Federalist 46 that states and individuals should utilize a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. So in this anti-commandeering doctrine, Mike, and you did a number of articles on this, I've talked about it as well, and then we also have a PDF that if you just search anti-commandeering doctrine on Google, it's one of the top 5 results depending on whether you're logged into your Google account or not. It comes up pretty high for me. And this PDF, it shows the 5 major cases now going back to 1842 where the Supreme Court has backed up James Madison, which is rare, by saying, look, the federal government, even if they enact something, and a lot of times they reinforce unconstitutional federal power in these things, but they say, oh, the federal government can do this, but they can't require the states to help them. Well, strategically, we know, as James Madison knew, that when the states and individuals opt out of federal programs in large numbers, there's not much the feds can do about it. So this is very positive. I think Kagan liked the idea of going against President Trump and the Republicans in Washington, D.C., so I'm fine with that. I think if it was Obama in office, it was going to be 5-4 or maybe the other way around. There were a lot of prominent legal theorists and law professors like Erwin Chemerinsky. This is like one of the leading guys out there when it comes to law professors in the country. They call him the dean. He's here at UC Irvine in Southern California. And he's been arguing for a long time that the anti-commandeering doctrine is antiquated. It needs to be gotten rid of. Well, now the lefties are on board with it too because they can see how it undermines Republican federal programs. We just want everyone to undermine almost everything because most of what they're doing, they shouldn't have never started in the first place. Right.
And I want to emphasize, and you've kind of emphasized this too. I want to reemphasize it for people that are watching. And Mike Maharrey and Michael Boldin are talking about the courts. you don't have to have the courts to refuse to cooperate. It's just a benefit for us in terms of a strategy, especially looking at state legislatures where a lot of the people in committees, prominent chairs, they're lawyers, they care about this legal stuff. So it opens doors and it creates an easier avenue for us to push through this type of anti-commandeering legislation. But the bottom line is you don't have to have the court's approval. I mean, you look at somebody like Rosa Parks. She didn't have any court approval when she refused to give up her seat on the bus. I mean, it really just is a matter of individuals, groups, states being willing to say no and to face down the powers that be. So
in the climate as it is today, and for quite a long time, without the courts, it's much more difficult. So people seem in larger numbers more willing to do stuff when the courts sanction them. However, I think people on the left have been very willing to do what they want, even when the courts tell them they can't.
Yep.
I would love to see this happen far more on the right, because a lot of times the right... There was, and I think we should do an article on this at some point. Recently, a small town in Illinois passed what a lot of publications are calling a gun rights sanctuary city ordinance, basically saying they're not going to, they're copying the immigration people, these immigration sanctuary cities, and you're going to have gun rights in this local town. But this is nonsense, because in general, the approach on the gun rights sanctuary city, which I wouldn't even call that, are basically saying, hey, if the courts agree with us, then we're not going to help enforce these gun control measures either on the state or the federal level. Whereas the left, the immigration sanctuary cities, don't say if the courts agree with us. They just say we're not going to help you. Right. Why not do the same thing? Have the backbone to do the same thing. Stop participating in these gun control measures, and get it done. It's time to stop waiting for approval and start exercising our rights, whether they want us to or not.
You look back to the medical marijuana and the way it grew, and then you had the Raich decision, and the Supreme Court said, "Yep, the federal government can regulate 6 plants in a woman's backyard." I didn't see any of the states that had medical marijuana legalized at that point say, "Oh, well, the court said no, we're going to shut down our medical marijuana program."
There were 10 of them at that time, and there's now
29. Plus DC.
30.
30.
If we're counting Utah, I am.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about Utah.
Utah is the most narrow medical marijuana program in the country by far, but it counts.
They're going to be growing marijuana.
It is legal for a limited level. So, but the point is, whether you agree with weed or people being able to use this plant or grow it or sell it or whatever, is that the strategy that they've been using works. So learn, if you don't like it and you want to see that strategy, or you want to see more gun rights or more healthcare freedom, let's get creative and come up with ways to do the same thing, because we know what works. We have, from 1996 till now, 22 years, 21 and a half, over 2 decades of strategy that has been effective, that is winning, it's chipping away, and it's just a matter of time before it's totally won.
If we want to, we can even go back to 1860 and see how successfully it was applied during the fugitive slave era, when northern states said, you know what, we're not going to enforce this. We're not going to send people back into slavery. We're going to take state efforts. We're going to take individual efforts. We're going to take local efforts. We're going to use jury nullification. And, it made it virtually impossible for the fugitive slave catchers to do their jobs in those states. It absolutely works. And it needs to be replicated. You're absolutely right. Use that strategy. Don't be a wuss.
Right. It really takes a lot of backbone. So these are some of the bills that we've been watching. There's a couple other ones coming up that we're going to keep track of. For example, another Right to Try Act is being sent to the governor in Alaska. House Bill 43 was passed by both houses pretty easily. A bill to restrict license plate tracking in Illinois and to restrict the transfer of that data to Washington, D.C., which they use it to develop databases of where people are going, who they're meeting. That's up for a hearing sometime this morning. It may have already happened, Senate Bill 880. And then a bill to expand on restrictions on asset forfeiture in Colorado. House Bill 1020 is on the governor's desk, and we should be getting an update on whether or not the old nasty Hickenlooper is going to sign the thing or not. He did last year.
Still the best name of all the governors, though.
Hickenpooper? I'm sure he got picked on a lot when he was a kid, which is why he likes being in government to control other humans. But that's another show. Anyways, we'll be watching those bills and a number of others that are still active this year, and we'll be reporting on them hopefully in the near future. Of course, if you support the work that we do here at the 10th Amendment Center, go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Sign up, help us pay the bills. It's as little as $2 a month, and we can continue this work to protect everything from your privacy, your right to keep and bear arms, your health freedom, on and on and on. Basically, get Washington, D.C. out of our area and allow the market to actually expand, right?
Absolutely.
So 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate you being here with us. If it wasn't for you, there'd be no point in being here. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on 10th or Tuesday. Have a great day.